cases of the Omicron COVID variant, according to the World Health Organization. The WHO said that the new variant is spreading at an unprecedented rate and is probably already in most countries.
We can calibrate this accordingly. We could, add maybe heighten the alert level a little bit or decrease capacities if it happens. We can adjust. But again, right now, based on the data, where a major surge in the NCR is not a big concern at this time.
Government maintains that the country will remain under alert level 2 until December 31, despite reporting the detection of the first 2 cases of the Omicron variant. What are the precautions for the public? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this midweek edition of The Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. With us tonight is Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Tayong dalawa na ngayon. Should I bother?
Maluwag na, nagbabakasyon na mga kasama natin. Ano?
Kamingay. Kunwari nagtatrabaho sila. Should I bother to ask you what your big story is for tomorrow or do we already know what it is?
Alam na natin pero bago tayo pumunta sa main topic natin, the Bicameral Conference Committee passed the budget for 2022 na.
5.032 ba? Trillion.
Yes, 5 trillion pesos. Saka mukhang na-restore yung 18 billion budget ng National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict. So yun yung medyo...
Na-restore siya. Okay. That among other budgets that were increased, I understand also DOH budgets were increased for special risk allowances for health workers, as well as I think for the purchase of booster shots. Pero hindi ko alam yung NTF-ELCAC na reinstate pala.
Yun ang sinasabi nila, Senate minority na ibalik yata yung 18 billion.
Okay, well, a lot of things to watch out for in the next few days. But of course, our big story for tonight, for tonight and for tomorrow, I suppose, would be yung detection ng first 2 cases ng Omicron variant that is finally here in the country. And for that, let's bring in our guest na siguro. Marami tayong pag-uusapan ngayong gabi. Okay, we begin tonight with the Pediatric Infectious Diseases expert, Dr. Ana Lisa Ong Lim of the DOH Technical Advisory Group. And also with us, Dr. Ronjin Solante, Chief of the San Lazaro Hospital's Adult Infectious Diseases and Tropical Medicine Department. Doctors, always a pleasure to have you back with us on the show. Unfortunately, we always have you on the show when there's a bit of alarming or concerning news. We wish we could, we wish we could talk to you about the Christmas season, but baka medyo out of topic yun. Anyway, docs, I suppose to start off with Omicron variant. Well, it's been here at least for the past 2 weeks already. We've only sequenced it or finished sequencing it in the last few days, but they were here nung November 30 pa and December 1. I don't know how people will react to that news. From your perspective, what should they take away from that story? Na meron ng Omicron dito at nandito na for the past 2 weeks and we don't know if there's more already here and if more are coming. What would you want to tell them, the public?
Can I take that first, Ed?
Sige, Doc. Para pala yung Doc, no? Doc Ana.
Well, so I think the public should be reassured that our systems are working. I think that's really the takeaway here, that we've been able to keep doors 1 and door 2 monitored well, no? When we talk about the 4-door response. Kasi ang goal naman, or because we realize that these variants typically come in through travelers, then the focus has always been to try to make sure that returning travelers are not harboring the virus. Mm-hmm. So the idea is to make sure that when they come in, before they even come in, they're tested. When they come in, they're tested. And when we allow them to leave the facilities, that they should either be home quarantine or self-monitoring depending on their vaccination status. Mm-hmm. So with the detection of these 2 travelers now, that means that the system actually works. And we just have to keep on doing this or even look more closely at the returning travelers to make sure that hindi tayo malusutan.
Doc Ronjin.
Yeah, agree with Dr. Ana. No, now I think we are prepared for this, and that was the initial reaction when Omicron was detected in South Africa. We ban and we have restrictions in travel. I'd just like to point this out. No, the 2 cases were detected or were tested November 30, and the other one is December 1.
December 1.
5 days after, 5 days after they were positive, and there were contact tracing done. Now, if you would expect that there is transmission already in the community, then there should already be some signals that there are cases already and beginning to increase now at this point in time, because it's now December 14. So, although it's still early, but again, I'm quite hopeful. No, maganda ang ginagawa ng government, and I think the genomic sequencing was done a bit faster now. Na nakikita natin, unlike before, it took us 3 weeks to get the result, and yung nag-positive 3 weeks ago. So maganda ang nangyayari ngayon, and I'm really banking on that we'll continue to do what we are doing now, which is we are in the right track, no? The vaccination, the restriction, and of course the health protocol that we are implementing.
Ami.
Well, nung nag-uumpisa tong threat na to, sinabi naman ng Department of Health that the arrival here of Omicron will be inevitable. But this was at a time na sinasabi nila mukhang mild lang to. Now on the other hand, this week nag-report ang UK na meron na daw death according to their Prime Minister. Meron na daw death due to Omicron, and health experts are warning against downplaying the threat posed by the variant. Ano po yung gusto nyong makita ngayon na measures, mga non-negotiable kung sakali, just to play safe? Kasi mag-alert level tayo and level 2 pa rin until the end of the month. What additional measures would you like to see?
Doc Ana.
Yeah. So, well, I think the point kasi is that people should realize na kahit mild, kung ikaw ay may risk factors, kung ikaw ay nasa senior age group, and nakikita natin sa ibang mga bansa, medyo marami ring pediatric population na natatamaan. No? Kung hindi ka protected or you have risk factors, then kahit mild sa iba, sa'yo pwedeng hindi. So hindi tayo dapat nung pakakampante na sabihin natin na kakayanin natin yan or babaliwalain dapat natin. So I'm sure sawang-sawa na yung mga taong pakinggan yung inuulit-ulit namin, pero yun lang talaga dapat gawin. Minimum public health standards, yung 4 dapat. Plus, of course, vaccines, no? Kasi ang laki talagang tulong. Nakita naman natin yung impact ng pagbabakuna, particularly in NCR. Napabilis ng husto yung pagbaba ng kaso dahil ang taas ng vaccination rate natin.
Yung isolation protocols, you think they should be tightened, Dr. Ronjin?
Well, I think yung protocols natin, nothing will be changed, no? That will still be in place, and it's just really making people aware of the importance of the health protocols, no? And importante pa rin, no? Active case finding, testing, no? Because we will not know kung may mga kaso unless may magpa-test, no? So even if it's a mild symptom and you know that you have that symptom, we still encourage everyone to get the test. Kasi baka naman kampante tayo, sasabihin, mild lang naman to. And hindi natin alam, it's already the variant, and somebody in the family that is vulnerable, medyo matanda or may mga comorbidities. No? So we need to increase the awareness again. Kung ano yung ginagawa natin noon sa Delta, we need to have it at this point in time. Particularly, no, we are now in the holiday season. Alam natin sa holiday season, talagang nagre-relax ang mga tao. And we had that last year. Case we're going up beginning February, March. No? So we need to learn our lesson at this point in time.
Doc Ronjin, let me go back to something you pointed out kanina. Given the lag time between the testing of these two and the release of the results today, I think, given that big lag time, you're saying na with that much lag time, if Omicron was elsewhere in the country, we would have seen kahit papano indicators already of community transmission. So I suppose by that you mean na mukhang malamang na wala pang iba.
Well, yeah, that's the one, partly, no? Kasi when we had the Delta variant, no, as far as I can remember, that was 3 weeks after the test was released and the sequence was released. And there were already pockets of cases. I remember
Okay.
Cagayan de Oro, and then there was in northern Luzon, no? And after that, 1 week after, it exploded. Every region already reported cases, no? So, nakita ko dito na medyo mas maiksi ngayon ang pag-detect natin. Ibig sabihin, na-detect ka agad. It didn't took longer, and the quarantine policy was in place for all travelers coming abroad. So I hope everything, every contact was tested, and until such time they were negative, bago natin pakawalan sila.
Doc Ana, I'd also like to ask you about something in particular. Kasi nga, people have been saying, I've been citing these early studies na it's more infectious, but possibly nga not as severe in terms of symptoms. And people might tend to think of that as parang that's comforting, and therefore let their guards down. I was reading something just a few hours ago. In the case of South Africa, when they first detected this variant, they were playing at around 250, 260 new cases a day in early November. 1 month later, they're hitting 37,000 cases a day. That's an enormous jump, and I suppose it's because of this variant. So ganun kalaki ang maaaring mangyari if we're not careful.
Yes, I think that's very important to emphasize, no, Ed. Yun nga ang inuulit-ulit nung WHO. Kaya din medyo nakakagulat eh, di ba? A lot of people criticize WHO for being a little bit on the slow side and very conservative when they make these announcements. Tapos all of a sudden, yung Omicron, wala man lang pahaging, bigla na lang VOC na siya. So I think that was actually also a cause for alarm among us in the health community here in the Philippines, where hearing WHO announced that this is already considered a VOC was actually quite concerning. And this was based on the characteristics that they picked up from this particular variant, where the mutations were significantly more than that of Delta, and also conferred the features that allowed it to be more transmissible.
Yeah, in fact, the speed of the spread in South Africa is also now being seen in the UK.
Yes.
Kaya nga ganun na lang yung warning nila. So you think we should tighten a bit some of the measures na nirelax in the past weeks, like for example yung capacities in mass transportation, for example, or in business establishments or churches, lalo na churches siguro dahil simbang gabi, umpisa na bukas.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So, yeah, that's a very good question, Abby. And actually, it connects with the four-door strategy that I mentioned earlier. Sana hindi na tayo kailangan umabot pa dun sa mga restriction of mobility or community quarantines, which are door 3 and door 4. Kasi napigil natin ang husto dun pa lang sa door 1 and door 2. So kung gusto nating magtuloy-tuloy, itong ginagawa natin, talagang magpo-focus tayo on making sure that every traveler that comes in, talagang nabantayan natin ang husto bago natin sila napalabas.
Dr. Rodjin, you think there's a need to rethink some of the measures that we have relaxed?
Yeah, before I'll answer that, Amy, I'll just need to review again what happened in South Africa, what happened in the US and in UK. These countries, when they have the Omicron variant, that was also the time that their masking rules was tinanggal nila.
Okay, that's important.
Tinanggal nila. Tapos, in-increase nila yung capacity sa mga establishment.
Yes.
They were banking a lot on their vaccine. That's why they are the ones, like for example, UK and US, they're the ones who initiated the whole population booster vaccination, because they're so confident that with vaccination, even if you take out the mask and with those health protocols, you want to improve their economy, But here in our country, we didn't change our health protocol. In fact, we maintained that. And in fact, IATF recommended na ibalik ang face shield sa mga areas na mga enclosed spaces with poor ventilation. And even if we increase the number of people in the establishment, as long as we have that face mask, the face shield, I think that is enough protection, no, for me. And then we go on with our vaccination. So for me, we are better than these countries at this point in time because of these policies.
I was about to ask you about that. What's the difference between us and South Africa, or what makes us different from them, or what will make us different from them? So that's the answer, I suppose. The masking is a big factor, and not just reliance on vaccinations. I mean, of course, it is a factor, pero not just on vaccinations.
Yes, correct.
So,
Oh, go ahead,
would you be pushing for a return of the face shield? Kasi nabanggit nyo na rin.
Actually, ang stand ko talaga sa face shield, if you are not comfortable in a place, especially in an enclosed space, then you need to wear the face shield. Ang nangyari lang, they changed the local government, changed it to parang optional na lang, no? And a lot of people are not wearing the face shield, but as long as the face mask is there, so I'm okay with that.
What about proposals to shorten the interval between the two doses of vaccines and the booster shot? That was being pushed earlier this morning by Octa Research and by the Go Negosyo Group. Sabi nila, why 6 months? Why not 4 months na lang? I can see Doc Ronjin already reacting. Doc, sige Doc. Go ahead.
Yeah. Dapat akala siguro nila candy ang binibigay natin sa mga tao, no? May mga data on that, no? Na hindi naman pwedeng kung gusto nating i-shorten, okay na tayo, no? The data is really compelling that if you give it 6 months or more, then you have better protection. If you give it less than 6 months, you may not be able to optimize the protection that you had when you give it at 6 months, no? So in terms of that, no? Even US did not recommend for a shorter interval from the primary vaccine series. Other countries did not. They still follow the 6 months because that's the data. Okay. So we need to follow that. No? We need to follow that. Hindi natin pwedeng i-shorten kung wala namang data na mas maganda ang less than 6 months over more than 6 months.
Well, I mean, let me squeeze this in lang before we let go of the peg. I think one study they were citing this morning, yung Octa Group as well as yung Go Negosyo Group, was one done in the UK. I forget which agency, Health Services something agency. Apparently, one of their findings was that in the case of AstraZeneca, by the 5th or 6th month, zero na raw or almost zero na raw yung efficacy niya against Omicron. I don't know how big the population was of their study, but that was what was cited kanina.
Now remember, no, when AstraZeneca had their study in South Africa, when they have the Beta variant, in fact, that was only 10% neutralization. And nobody developed severe cases. Okay? And until now, no, based on their new data, it can still hold through with the 6 months, no? Even if you say that bumaba yung neutralizing antibody. So again, the point here is that you have other aspects in the vaccine, no? And most of this data will still be, they're still good as long as it's not more than 6 months.
Doc Ana, do you share that view? Kasi sabi ng Department of Health kanina, the vaccine expert panel is actually studying this proposal to shorten the interval between the second dose and boosters, especially for the elderly and immune compromised. Meron na bang, what's your view on this?
Well, both of us, Dr. Jean and myself, are also in that team, no? So that's going to come up in the meeting sooner than later. I think the thing we need to remember is that we have also the experience with other vaccines to tell us that when we talk about boosters, typically a longer interval between the initial series is more helpful than a shorter interval. And when you shorten the interval, at some point later on, you'll probably need to give another dose.
Yes.
So the question actually is as much an issue of what's the best schedule, and can we wait for that best schedule Kasi siguro consideration din nga naman talaga kung kunwari nagsimula ng kumalat ng Omicron or nakakita na tayo ng local transmission. Kung kunwari makikita natin may idadagdag na pakinabang yung giving the boosters earlier, baka ma-force to good din tayo. No? So I think that's why it's on the table. It's not totally, hindi natin yan i-discuss. We always want to look at the data and see what the best options are and what are the other acceptable options.
Well, beyond the interval between the second dose and the booster, there's also talk about a probable need for several boosters. Siguro daw, baka every 3 months. Is that a plausible scenario, considering what we're seeing now?
Baka hindi naman ganun ka-frequent. Sana naman hindi.
Parang quarterly
pero,
naman yan.
You know, I can actually imagine that happening. If you have another variant, it's totally possible, di ba? Kasi kaya naman nag-take off yung issue about boosters in our country is really also because of the threat of Omicron. Nung hindi pa naman yan dumating, parang we were actually looking at, sige, let's observe, let's see what the best schedules are. Pero nung dumating Omicron, na fast track lahat.
Doctors, let me backtrack a bit. Okay, we know, at least from the initial studies, that Omicron is more transmissible than Delta and the Wuhan original virus. But in terms of bringing in more critical or more serious symptoms, how does it compare to Delta? I mean, we know Delta. Well, actually, I'm not even sure about Delta vis-a-vis the original virus. Pero how do they compare in terms of serious symptoms?
Can I take that?
Doc, sige,
So,
Doc. Oh, you're both doctors. Okay.
Yung kasing
Baka na.
yung kasing issue with Delta landing more people in the hospital.
Opo.
Hanggang ngayon hindi pa naman natin sinasabi na nangyayari yun kasi mas mabagsik yung virus itself. Kasi nandun naman yung factor na dahil mas maraming nahawa ang may edad saka may comorbidity, syempre natural na ma-hospital sila. So, entirely plausible na gano'n na naman ang mangyayari dito sa Omicron kasi kahit ano pang variant yan, kahit original strain pa yan, kung ang tinamaan hindi kaya yung katawan,
Opo.
ma-hospital. So kung nagdagan yung dami nun, magkakaroon na naman ng malaking demand on healthcare utilization. So yun na naman ang iniiwasan natin. We just want to make sure that those who are at risk are already protected.
In which case po, what would make our situation now different from the Delta surge earlier this year? The fact lang of the vaccinations having been taken by more people, tama ho ba? Or is there any other factor there?
That will be one factor, no? Hopefully, we would have been able to vaccinate more people since that time, and therefore, if that's the case, that we hope that the transmission can be somewhat mitigated or decreased because we have a broader population that's already protected. Pero tandaan natin, hindi magkakatulad yung rates of coverage in different parts of the country.
Yes,
At marami
yes.
pa rin sa A2 at A3 ang hindi pa bakunado. So, if you'll allow me to appeal once again, no, kung ikaw ay nasa A2 at A3 at hindi ka pa bakunado, please, magpabakuna na kayo.
Opo. Doc, yun nga, but that brings me back to my question nga, can we afford to be less concerned about Omicron vis-a-vis the Delta variant, given that this is much more infectious than the Delta variant? If we were panicking with Delta, how should we face Omicron? Doctors, kayo po.
Yeah,
So,
can I take that?
Go ahead, Jean.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take this now. When we have Delta, it is also highly transmissible. We have more cases getting the infection, and we have more people hospitalized now. Now, there's Omicron now, and then people are already vaccinated now. So the question here is, how one person already vaccinated, what is the risk of getting an Omicron variant compared to an unvaccinated? Ito yung very critical at this point in time. If I'm vaccinated and comparing it with unvaccinated, how will I deal with an Omicron variant? So, alam natin yun sa data sa US, no? Which was released the other day. I think 47% of the 143 cases were vaccinated, and they only have mild symptoms. Okay, but their concern is even if you're vaccinated and you still get the infection, nawala yung infection blocking ability ng bakuna because of the variant. No? So how can we retain that infection blocking? Kasi ang importante pa rin dito, as much as possible, we need to prevent the transmission of the virus. Maski mild lang yan, pero kung dadami ang taong merong mild, meron talagang ma-hospital dyan because of the vulnerable population.
Opo.
So we need to maintain that level of protections na bakunahan. And one of that is giving a booster. But for me, I think even with the booster, pwede ka pa rin. For me, it's really the health protocol that will really be an important part here. Wearing your face mask, avoid gatherings, and face shield.
Well, isang malaking sector ng population natin na unvaccinated are the children. You think the arrival of Omicron should speed up pediatric vaccination and for younger children in particular?
That's a very good question, Ami. And in fact, even before, after the 12 to 17-year-olds started to be vaccinated, alam naman kasi natin na may EUA na ang Pfizer for the 5 to 11. So, kasama na rin yun sa inaabangan natin, no, na sana magkaroon na rin ng EUA for 5 to 11-year-olds in the country so that we can proceed with the rollout for that group already. I think it's becoming a little bit more urgent because of the threat of Omicron. And in other countries, we've seen that children have been affected primarily because they represent the unvaccinated in those countries.
Mm-hmm. What about the plan to fully return to in-person classes by January? You think it should be put on hold for the meantime because of Omicron?
I think there's room to observe, no? Parang nakakapanghinayang kasi all systems go na sana, everybody's preparing for it, and I'm sure even the kids are so excited. Pero mahirap naman magsabi na sige tuloy na tayo tapos makikita natin dumadami yung mga kaso. I don't think we can manage that. So baka we'll have to observe and see how things go.
Doc Jean, you agree with that?
Yeah, so I think what's crucial dito, Ami, no? What will happen by January? Ano ang mga kaso natin sa January? Because the December will be an indicator. Nandito na ang Omicron, nandito ang holidays, nandito ang mga gatherings and parties. What will happen in January? And probably we can recalibrate our position on that kung kailangan tayo mag face-to-face or hindi based on the data coming January.
Okay, Docs, bago namin kayo palayain, can we ask you to leave a message for the public, your messages to the public, especially for this Christmas season? What do you want them to remember, especially in the next 2 weeks, as they go out and party, or have a good time or pray?
Okay, I'll take the first as always, no, palagi kong sinasabi to, we have the holidays and we can celebrate by not partying, by not doing any unwanted gatherings, no. Especially now that the Omicron variant, we don't need to panic, but we have to be aware. Our health protocol is very important even with this holiday, and of course, yung mga vaccines, booster and those unvaccinated.
Doc Ana.
Siguro what I'd like to add is I think dito natin pairalin yung pagiging malikhain natin as a people. Pwede naman tayong mag-celebrate while keeping safe. And I think siguro yung isang mamimiss talaga natin yung handaan at kainan. Pero ang pagtatanggal ng mask, medyo pag-iingatan natin ng husto yan. Kung ang mga kasama natin ay hindi part ng ating original bubble, baka ibahin natin yung paraan natin ng pagsasalo-salo. Pwedeng malayo, pwedeng you sit together with your bubbles, pwedeng you don't eat all at the same time, no? Kasi tatandaan natin, once tinanggal mo yung mask, talagang libreng-libre na pwedeng-pwede nang pumasok yung virus, and you don't want that to happen.
At higit sa lahat siguro, iwasan ng buffet. Okay. Maraming salamat, Dr. Ronjin Solante, Dr. Ana Ong Lim. Thank you for joining us tonight. At ingat po.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
We will just go into a break, so please stay with us. to Chiefs here on One News, and now joining us is Brigadier General Edgardo Palma, Chief of the Office of Strategic Studies and Strategy Management of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Good evening, General Palma, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening, General.
Magandang gabi po. Sir,
Mute po yata
can you hear
kayo.
us? We're not sure if you're muted or if you're ano eh.
Naka-mute siya.
Yes, good evening to everyone.
Okay na.
Good
Yes, sir.
evening, Sir Ed and Madam Ami. Una sa lahat, gusto kong magpasalamat sa One News sa pag-imbita sa akin dito sa inyong palatuntunan na pinamagatang The Chief. I'm grateful and privileged to share my insights and experience regarding the AFP Transformation Roadmap.
Yes, sir.
Magandang gabi po sa lahat.
Yes, sir. Magandang gabi po. Sir, of course, we want to talk about the AFP Transformation Roadmap. Pero bago lahat po, can you tell us more about your office, itong Office of Strategic Studies and Strategy Management? What exactly does your office do, and what is its role in the AFP?
Okay, let me start responding in this question by saying a little background about our office. The office was strategic studies and strategy management was formally named as the Office for Strategy and Strategic or Special Studies. Now, to my recollection, the office was renamed and reactivated on 11 April of 2014 in order to cater to the strategy management function for the establishment of the AFP Transformation Roadmap. Now, OSAM is characterized or categorized as the personal staff. With this in mind, the general and specific function of the OSAM are the following. The OSAM is primarily responsible for the conduct of strategic, spatial, and policy studies in order to assist the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines in decision-making process relative to the AFP and our national security, and also manages the execution of cross-functional processes related to governance and strategy management for the attainment of the vision and long-term strategic objectives of the AFP through the successful implementation of our AFP Transformation Roadmap. Now, let me enumerate our specific mandates based on the approved table of organizations and equipment. First, OSAM is as principal staff act as or responsible for the conduct of strategic review and policy assessment. The office also formulate and prepare strategic, spatial, and policy studies related to national security and the armed forces of the Philippines. Second, the OSAM aims to continuously facilitate the alignment of systems, functions, and policies, as well as budget in support of the strategic initiatives as identified. Alignment can be attained through the implementation of the performance scorecard of unit and offices. Third, OSAM also monitor the implementation and progress of CSAP performance scorecard and the management of strategic initiatives and programs. The CSAP performance scorecards contain 15 strategic objectives, 22 strategic measures or indicators of performance, and 17 strategic initiatives, projects, and programs.
General?
Fourth,
Apo.
we monitor, review, and evaluate the implementation of initiatives or key programs, projects, and activities outlined in the CSAP performance scorecard that are managed by the Joint Personnel and Specialist Staff, the Unified Commands, the Major Services, and the AFP-wide support units through the regular conduct of the programs review. Fifth, we also communicate and advocate the strategic plan, governance program, and other reforms initiatives to both internal and external stakeholders.
General, if you don't mind po, kasi I think you're going to talk about 15 points eh. But if you don't mind, I'll break in po and try to digest it po for the benefit of our viewers. So if my understanding is correct po, your office deals with the assisting in policy formulation for both internal AFP use and security issues in relation to external elements or variables, like for example, between the AFP and other departments, or AFP and other armed forces all over the world. Tama ho ba? So it's both internal and external policy formulation.
Yes, that's one. And of course, we most of our activities right now is geared towards the transformation roadmap. That's what we are one of capitalizing right now, so that the organization can perform well and can deliver its mandated tasks.
Siguro, General, you can tell us kung ano, kahit summary, kung ano yung transformation roadmap na yun hanggang 2028 yan eh. Ano yung salient points and what are the main objectives?
Well, ang main objective nito is for us to achieve our goal of becoming a world-class armed forces, which is a source of national pride. Before, when we start this transformation journey, our objective is to become a capable armed forces. And then on our second base camp, which is for 2022, we are supposed to have a strong and sustainable armed forces that is contributing to the security and the continuing effort to our regional peace.
By strong, General, you mean higher level ba yan dun sa minimum credible defense? Yung capability ng armed forces? Mas malakas ba yan doon?
Of course, yes. Dapat maging malakas ang ating armed forces. Kasi we are not at far with this world-class armed forces na sinasabi natin. Dapat medyo, by 2028, dapat medyo malakas na tayo. We are not at far of those nations that have strong armed forces worldwide.
Gerald, baka you can give us some tangible examples of what we intend to have by 2028. Kasi I understand meron ng parating na, for example, attack helicopters coming from Turkey. First batch to be arriving, I think within the next week, among other things. So in the next few years, what should the public expect for its armed forces and from its armed forces in terms of, for example, capability?
Yes, of course, in terms of our personnel, by 2028, we should be R2 by then. Sa ngayon kasi R3 lang tayo, no? So meaning by 2028, we almost have fulfill our required personnel fill up. And of course, for our modernization program capability, dapat medyo na-achieve natin o na-acquire na natin yung parang first horizon, second horizon, of course, yung pang third horizon natin na listed capability equipment. Para sa ganun, masasabi natin na ang armed forces ay talagang malakas at pwede nang pangtapat sa mga world-class na armed forces natin sa ngayon.
Yes, sir. Like for example now, meron tayong parang lift aircraft, yung lead-in fighter trainer, the FA-50. By when would the armed forces want to have its own talagang fighter aircraft or fighter interceptor or whatever the case is that you're targeting? In the same way na maybe, for example, for the Navy, nung una kasi napag-uusapan ng submarine hindi ko lang alam if it's still on the table. If it's still on the table or is it under the table or under the sea? So ano balita doon?
Tama po yan. So sa ngayon kasi meron tayong mga missile, mayroong mga frigates na sinasabi natin na good for combat patrol para ang ating kasing yung ating maritime security at saka yung sa ating coastal kasi medyo mahaba yon. So we need more frigates that is with capability of providing a combat patrol para ma-secure natin yung ating maritime security.
Opo.
Mayroon din tayong kasi yung mga aircraft at para yung ma-achieve natin yung flight plan at saka sail plan natin. Doon nakasulat yung ating dream of becoming a world-class armed forces. At saka yung requirement na yon, nandun siya nakasulat din doon. Mayroon tayong mga objectives na dapat na ma-achieve by the year 2020.
General, since your office is helping in the formulation of policy, ano yung kino-consider nyo na biggest national security threat atin at this time?
So far we have this pandemic, no? So iyan ang mga nakikita natin na biggest pandemic kasi wala tayong panama diyan talaga. We have to make sure that our policies is in place so that pagka nag-execute ng plano, nag-execute ng ating mission yung ating mga kasundaluhan, dapat naka-tune in tayo sa dapat na mangyari based on the mandates ng ating offices at saka ng higher headquarters. Second,
Okay. Sige po.
second, meron naman tayong yung sa issues dito sa internal, but those are manageable and we have timetable for that to accomplish. And of course, right now we are just preparing to our armed forces sa shifting sa external threat na. And of course, to include some emerging threat that we need to consider kasi nag-i-evolve naman yung threat natin eh. So kinakailan maging ready tayo sa mga pagkakataon na mayroon tayong mga paparating na mga threat na hindi natin inaasahan.
So ano po yung emerging threat na yon? I'm talking about armed threat.
Yes. Sa ngayon meron tayong nakikita na yung mga yung cyber security threat, something like that. And siyempre hindi naman ganun kadali ito na i-address, no? So we have to prepare and study well para kuan. And of course, this can be done also through the our whole of government effort kasi siyempre ang armed forces we have a armed component na pwedeng mag-address niyan, but we need also some stakeholders to join us so that medyo malakas ang ating pag-address dito sa mga threat.
General, in your list of threats po, can you give us an idea where in your list bumabagsak yung for example yung local communist armed conflict as well as yung extremist groups in the southern Philippines, and I don't know kung nasa listahan din ninyo yung private armed groups, whether they're extremists or not. Where do they fall under, and anong ranking nila doon sa inyong listahan in terms of urgency and priority?
Sa ngayon, ang urgency natin is develop our capabilities doon sa water. Kasi yung waters natin kasi medyo mahaba talaga. So we need to develop our competencies doon sa ating karagatan. So kinakailangan mayroon tayong mga patrol ship, mayroon tayong mga missile kasi sa ngayon, yung mga threat na sasabi natin, mayroon na tayong mga bansa na talagang malalakas. They have capability to shoot yung kanilang targets beyond 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers. So yan ang pinaghahanda rin natin na sana mayroon tayong mga ganung capability para at least we are not that far in addressing this kind of threat.
Is China considered a threat, General?
Come again po?
Is China considered a threat insofar as their activities in the South China Sea are concerned?
Yes, there are activities na we are also but we still observe the maximum tolerance. There are a lot of issues to consider, but these are political issues to be addressed by specific bodies. Mayroon tayong task force sa West Philippine Sea, so sila yung appropriate office to answer on these issues and concern.
Well, apart from this, may FINORM si Armed Forces Chief, in-announce ni Armed Forces Chief ngayon na Anti-Corruption Committee daw in the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Can you tell us more about this?
Actually, ang purpose naman itong anti-corruption na to is to really sustain our effort of having a good governance. And of course, to secure the interests of our organization, siyempre, part na yun doon sa pag-professionalize ng ating armed forces at saka personnel para ma-achieve natin yung talagang AFP's trust. Sa ngayon, mataas ang rating ng ating armed forces, but still, we need to sustain this comfort. We have to sustain this feelings or as what our stakeholders feel to us.
Can you just give us an example of a specific measure that you plan to implement to prevent corruption?
Come again po? You can...
Pwede pong bigyan nyo kami ng example, specific example ng anti-corruption measure in the AFP na balak nyong i-implement.
Well, isa sa mga kwan is we have the policies and the security measures built in sa isang organization or opisina. Yun ay we have internal audit or internal security officer na sila yung nagmi-maintain ng security ng even yung opisina, the camps and everything. Those are measures that we really consider right now. And of course, yung sa documentation and sa paggawa ng mga documents at saka yung sa organizational activity, nandyan yung OTEA at saka yung sa UTIG. Itong dalawang opisina na to are the one that check all the activities of the office and the units. Yung sa kwan is pertains to financial matters, pag-OTEA. Then pagdating naman sa capability and capacity, nandyan yung ating OTIG, yung Office of the Internal or the Office of Inspector General.
Yes, sir. Sir, speaking of the AFP Transformation Roadmap 2028, I have to point this out na the AFP appears to have really transformed last dapat meron kang kasamang keblar, plato at bakal at yung mga baril nyo hindi na kasing tanda o mas matanda pa kaysa sa mga sundalo. So there have been quite a lot of transformations of the AFP in the last 2 decades. But I'd like to ask you pa rin, if you can, to give us a point of comparison with our other Asian neighbors. So para lang we can situate ourselves. Where are we exactly as far as transforming the AFP into a credible, real, and well-established defense force? As far as our neighbors are concerned, what would be a good comparison po, if that's a fair question to ask? What would be a good comparison to us where we are right now?
Sa ngayon kasi, if we talk about our personnel, ang mga tao natin kasi they are already aware of their contribution to our strategy to become a world-class armed forces with a source of national pride. Before parang medyo pahapyaw lang, but this time nagiging institutionalized na. Pagdating doon naman sa ating capability, we are acquiring more assets, we are acquiring more equipment that gear towards a modern armed forces na. Sa ngayon, doon natin mag-gauge yung ating armed forces na pang world class na talaga because of our equipment and because of our discipline ng ating kasundaluhan. Before, there are a lot of cases, but now, tingnan mo, nagiging disiplinado sila and the people are now admiring these soldiers because of their discipline. Medyo in terms of training din, medyo not at far doon sa ating mga kasundaluhan sa ibang nasyon. As a matter of fact, nagkakaroon na tayo ngayon ng mga training involving other countries. So doon masasabi natin na pwede nang sumabay ang ating mga kasundaluhan sa mga countries na medyo malalakas at medyo malalaki na. Balikan ko lang yung sa personnel, no? As of now, we have a 0 human rights cases. So doon mo masasabi na pati yung mga tao natin, kasundalo natin are really disciplined. So doon pa lang makikita mo na ang isang armed forces is now becoming modern, becoming observing our mandates. At siyempre, pagka ganun ang magiging takbo ng nila, siyempre na-internalize nila kung ano yung good governance. Sa katunayan nga, yung mga tao natin, they are also having their personal scorecard. Doon sa personal scorecard is contributory to our organizational scorecard. So doon pa lang na check natin, so nagiging ano sila, nagiging aware sila and and because so they are being monitored their performances.
Yung scorecard is about human rights record? Kasi itatanong ko sana yun eh. Yung transformation roadmap, meron siyang human rights component?
Actually, ma'am, yes, kasama doon sila sa NOS. But of course, the Human Rights Office can do something about that. They do some also information drive. Sila ang one of the stakeholders. Kasama ang G1 dyan, the Office for Personnel. Sila yung nagkakaroon ng ng accounting dito kung mayroong mga cases yung mga kasundalo natin or not. And if there is, so they are the one who monitor these cases if there is.
Okay. Maraming salamat po, Brigadier General Edgardo Palma, the head of the Office of the Strategic Studies and Strategy Management Office of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. General Palma, maraming salamat for joining us tonight. At ingat po.
Okay,
Thank you, General.
Po, Ma'am Ami and Sir Ed. So, don't worry, the Armed Forces of the Philippines will continue to transform itself into a better and more reliable and accountable military organization worthy of every Filipino, or every Filipino's pride.
Thank you, General Palma. Maraming salamat po. That will be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Now, before we go, remind our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Edlin Gao.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star, and we are One News.